Okay, so in this video, I'm going to be going over pages 9 and 10 in your ratios guided notes. And the focus is going to be on solving for missing values in ratios and fractions, okay? So all we have here is an equal sign in between two ratios. So these are going to end up being equivalent, but instead of just giving us the two ratios that are equal, there's going to be a number that you have to solve for. So I'm going to go over how to do that, okay? So for some of them, depending on your multiplication division skills, you might just be able to tell by looking at them. But for most of us, when we're starting out, following the process I'm going to go over will be the best. So what you're going to do is you're going to identify the numbers that are on the same side of the ratio. So what I mean by that is 12's on the left side, and then we're trying to solve for the number that's on the left side over here. 3's on the right side and 1's on the right side. Okay, so what we start by doing is we draw an arrow from the 3 to the 1. Okay, again, they're on the same side, we say, because they're both on the right side of the ratio. Okay, so why that's important is because what you're going to do is you're going to ask yourself, what would you do to a 3 to end up with a 1? Now, remember, when we're doing ratios, we're not adding and subtracting. We are multiplying or dividing. Okay? So you would say, okay, well, if I have 3 and I end up with 1, I need to be dividing because I'm getting smaller. So you would say, well, what's 3 divided by 1? Or what do you divide 3 by to get 1? Okay, and the answer would be 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1. So if I divided the 3 by 3 to get this, that means I have to do the same thing to the other side of the ratio. Remember, when we make equivalent ratios, we always do the same operation to both sides. So if I'm dividing by 3 here, I need to divide the 12 by 3. So we draw an arrow from the 12 to the line, and we go divided by 3. So now we just figure out, well, 12 divided by 3 is 4. So I've just figured out the missing value. A 12 to 3 ratio is equal to a 4 to 1 ratio. Okay, so I'm going to go to the next example here. 4 to 24 equals 48 to what? So again, I'm going to identify the numbers that are on the same side of the ratio. So 4 is on the left, 48's on the left. So they're on the same side. So I'm going to draw an arrow. And I'm going to ask myself, in order to go from a 4 to a 48, what would I have done to that 4? So I start with a smaller number, I end up with a bigger number. So that should tell you that it's multiplying. Okay, so then you would ask yourself, okay, well, 4 times what is 48? Or, if you want to think about it in terms of division, 48 divided by 4 is what? It's the same process. Okay, so I know that 4 times 12 is 48, so times 12, which means that I must have multiplied 24 times 12 to end up with this answer over here. Okay, so now I'm going to just figure that multiplication out. So 24 times 12. Should know how to do that. And I end up with 288. So that's what goes in the missing blank. So 4 to 24 equals 48 to 288. Okay, next I have a couple fraction examples, but it's a very similar process. So 16 over 2 is equal to what over 1? Well, you can probably figure this one out without even doing the process I'm going to tell you, because you know what 16 divided by 2 is. But what you're going to do is, instead of comparing numbers on the same side of the ratio, now you're going to look at denominators and numerators. So you're always going to compare denominators with denominators. So you're going to ask yourself, well, how did you go from 2 to 1? What would you do to 2 to end up with 1? Remember, we're only multiplying and dividing. Well, if you divide by 2, you're going to end up with 1. Remember, what you do to the top of a fraction, you got to do to the bottom. So 16 divided by 2 is 8. Right? 16 divided by 2 is 8. 8 divided by 1 is 8. 8 equals 8. Okay, coming down to this question. So again, I'm going to compare denominators because I'm trying to figure this out here. So you're going to say, okay, you went from 8 to 24. What operation would you do in order to do that? And what would you be multiplying by? Well, I know that 8 times 3 is 24. So if I multiplied the bottom by 3, I got to multiply the top. 25 times 3 is 75. Okay, back to ratios. Again, I'm going to compare the numbers that are on the same side of the ratio. So 5 and 25. So I'm going to draw my arrow. I'm going to ask myself, what do I do to a 5 to end up with a 25? Well, multiplied by 5 sounds right. So what I do to the one side, I must do to the other. So 1 times 5 is 5. So 1 to 5 ratio is the same as a 5 to 25. And this bottom one, sometimes your missing value is going to be on the left side of the ratio, okay? But don't panic, the same kind of process applies. So there's a couple ways to think about it, but usually I'll still start and draw my arrow this way. So I'm going to compare the 6 and the 2 because they're on the same side. So I'm going to say, well, what would I do to 6 to end up with 2? This time I'm going from bigger to smaller. So I'm dividing by 3. 6 divided by 3 is 2. But now you ended up with 18 here. And you divided this number by 3, which means that this number you would have divided by 3 to get 18. So you're going to have to figure out, well, what divided by 3 gives me 18? Or, remember, the opposite of divide is multiply. So you can go 18 times 3 to figure that out. 54. Okay, so 54 to 6 ratio is the same as an 18 to 2 ratio. Okay, if I reduce these, I would end up with a 9 to 1 ratio. Okay, so that is page 9. I'm going to do a separate video for page 10.